and welcome everyone joining us today. My name is Carissa Hobson, and I am a member of the Paris Committee of Capacity Building. I would like to warmly welcome you to this event, Good Practices of Capacity Building for Climate Change in SIDS. This event is led by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, in collaboration with the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, under the PCCB Network. I'm excited to see this new collaboration between OECD and UNDESA, two members of the PCCB Network, and how they have bridged both their capacity building efforts under the PCCB Network's umbrella to create today's unique technical panel discussion. I look forward to hearing from 7 speakers on their knowledge and reflections on tested solutions and good practices that can help SIDS overcome existing capacity barriers to act and be more ambitious in the area of climate change. Before we dive deeper into the theme of this event, I'd like to quickly introduce you to the PCCB. Established at COP21 in 2015, the Paris Committee on Capacity Building seeks to address current and emerging gaps and needs in implementing and further enhancing capacity building in developing countries. Its mission is to identify potential solutions to address such gaps and needs, including enhancing the coherence and coordination of capacity building efforts related to climate change. I am the lead of PCCB Working Group 3, which focuses on awareness raising, communications, and stakeholder engagement through activities such as today's panel discussion and relevant actors under and outside the convention on effective approaches for capacity development in SIDS to address climate change. To support the PCCB's mission and mandate, the committee launched the PCCB Network in 2020 as a voluntary association of interested stakeholders engaged in climate-related capacity building. The PCCB Network provides a platform to share information on best practices, contributes to the work of PCCB in fulfilling its mandate, and seeks to connect with its peers across sectors and regions. As of today, the network unites 372 organizations from 91 countries, where several areas of capacity building in the context of climate action are addressed among the network members. The PCCB regularly mobilizes the expertise of its network members through events like these. Through the collaboration between OECD and UNDESA, the PCCB network is excited to support learning opportunities on good practices for SIDS capacity development towards climate change. To learn more about the PCCB network, how to become a member, and its collaboration possibilities as a member, follow the link in the chat. As many of you may know, small island developing states, SIDS, encompass a collection of countries and territories located in the Caribbean, Pacific, Africa, Indian Ocean, and South China Sea. Although having minimal responsibility for climate change, these nations face its devastating consequences firsthand. Despite this, SIDS are at the forefront of climate action, setting an example for others by actively working towards implementing ecosystem-based approaches and nature-based solutions, building climate resilience, as well as formulating and implementing their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. All in all, capacity development plays a vital role in enabling SIDS to accomplish their climate goals. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, has recently stressed the urgent need for capacity development assistance in SIDS, particularly in the area of climate change adaptation. Although donors have made efforts to address the obstacles and challenges faced by SIDS, recent evaluations of projects and programs indicate that current approaches may not consistently produce the desired outcomes. In response to this pressing need, the OECD and UNDESA's SIDS unit have been diligently working on capacity development for climate change in SIDS. The SIDS unit of UNDESA serves as a central hub for supporting SIDS by providing technical guidance and capacity building support for the effective implementation of important agreements. leveraging its wide range of offerings to support the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. UNDESA customizes its assistance to address the unique requirements of SIDS. From the OECD side, their research has focused on identifying good donor practices in 5 key themes: access to climate finance, climate data and services, working with non-governmental partners, regional and triangular approaches, and effective issues. In today's panel discussion, we will explore effective capacity development practices that can genuinely empower SIDS in their efforts to combat climate change. The OECD's key themes will be addressed to provide a guiding framework for donor action and raise several important questions for donors, SIDS, and other stakeholders alike. I am excited to hear from 7 distinguished speakers, experts, and practitioners who will share their invaluable insights and experiences through this technical panel discussion today, and will aim to collectively chart a course towards effective, long-lasting capacity development. On behalf of the PCCB, I would like to thank the OECD team, as well as UNDESA, for collaborating on this event. Thank you as well to our panelists and our audience. Today, we all have a unique opportunity to learn from one another, exchange ideas, and foster collaborations that can lead to tangible progress in supporting SIDS. Now over to Ms. Bahara Saidi, who will be moderating the event to kickstart the event and introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karisha, for the very articulate way of highlighting what the PCCB is doing and why we are having this conversation today, and the importance of sharing lessons learned and practices vis-a-vis climate change and how the donor community is engaging in the context of SIDS. As mentioned, my name is Bahar Sayedi. I'm a Senior Sustainable Development Officer here at United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. I am pleased to be moderating this discussion. We have an excellent panel of experts with us, so let's get started. The structure is that we will have 2 framing presentations from the co-organizers of the webinar, and then we will get into the panel discussion with the experts. So let me briefly introduce our presenters from the co-organizers. We have Mr. Juan Casado Asensio. He's a policy analyst from the Development Cooperation Directorate of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And then we have Mr. Maximilian Pardo y Fernandez. He is an interregional advisor on SIDS within the SIDS units of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Thank you for being with us. Juan, I'm going to pass the floor to you, and Juan will tell us a little bit more about the upcoming report and some of the key messages emerging from that. Juan, over to you.
Many thanks, Bahar. And thanks so much for the introduction, and also to Karisha for the good framing of this webinar and the collaboration. And I'm uploading the slides that I would like to share with you. I wonder whether you can see them. No? Yes. Okay, great. So yes, let me see. All right. Perfect. So yes, so I would like to provide you a short presentation with a few insights on our work on capacity development for climate change in SIDS. This work is forthcoming. It's a report that aims to set the baseline on what donors are doing in the area of capacity development for climate change in small island developing states. And as such, is trying to identify those areas where donors could build upon, replicate, scale up, or even get inspired from to engage in working in small island developing states. The idea is to build on previous work that we've done on capacity development, and that in our collaboration with the PCCB Network, we've been presenting in the last couple of years, and hopefully we will distribute the slides, and then you can click on the image below to access that report. But also we have the political endorsement for this work from the DAC, from the Development Assistance Committee, and the members of that committee who have been regularly mentioning and prioritizing action in SIDS, for example, through the DAC declaration that was put forward for the COP26 or the high-level meeting conclusions of the 2020 year. Yeah, and the work on capacity development is also building on that's why we don't talk about capacity building, but we talk about capacity development. But in essence, we mean the same things, and it's just as the UNFCCC, which uses the term building rather than development. But the idea here is to look at the capacity development in a broad way, including individual, organizational, and systemic capacities. Now, the report is organized in a modular way. So there's 5 modules, as Carisha mentioned at the beginning, and then 2 common chapters, one that will provide a little bit of context on the role of donors today in small island developing states, which is, of course, an important role, providing finance, capacity, technology, but where climate change is coming as a major disruptor of the status quo. We have massive climate-related risks. I mean, this has been very well put forward by the IPCC latest report on the situation in SIDS, around 8 thematic areas or areas where those risks are going to materialize, with many compound risks, cascading risks, loss and damage related to climate change, and in a context of inherently structural socioeconomic limits as well. So in essence, a context of a precarious balance where things can change very quickly, and actually overnight you may find yourself with regression in a socioeconomic and development perspective. This context reinforces a dependency on external support, which in the case of climate change and as documented in the report, NDCs, NAPs, etc., to be fully materializing will require external support in many of the SIDS that we studied, and a context where graduation from official development assistance is also a potential barrier.
That window for a little bit.
Hello? I guess there was a glitch. And so, yes, so graduation, the current situation is of 11 small island developing states potentially leaving the list of ODA by 2030, a number of them moving in and out, and so on. I left also here some information on the methodological underpinnings of this report in case you're interested in finding out, but basically a lot of consultations with some countries, Sao Tome and Principe, Comoros, further insights from other small island developing states from the work that our colleagues at the OECD are doing, workshops, member feedback, and also statistical analysis from our own database. And that will be the basis of this second common chapter of the report, which is basically looking at what's happening in terms of official development assistance and the trends there for capacity and climate change. And overall, we see a story of growth. As Carisha was saying, donors are investing more and more on these issues. Over 300 million on average per year is going to the SIDS for this. That represents about a third, more or less, on average, over 2015-2021 of what is being invested in SIDS with respect to climate change, tripling over this period, a lot for adaptation, but also increasingly for mitigation, which in a way reflects this idea of building the resilience of SIDS. But when you actually look deeper into this data, you also find that there's a lot of unequal distribution of the flows. There's not a lot of the members that are being active in supporting SIDS on this agenda. Not all the SIDS are receiving the same amount of attention. So it's mainly focusing on a few Caribbean, a few Pacific SIDS that capture the bulk of this support. Mostly richer and more developed, if you want, SIDS are receiving most of this support. Vulnerability concerns are not driving ODA to these countries. And as Carisha also mentioned, the results from evaluations from the literature, from our consultations also show that often we could do, the donor community could be achieving more sustainable or looking for more efficient outcomes in many of these investments. What the consultations helped us uncover are those 5 modules, or the decision to structure this work around 5 areas only, because there are many other areas we could have focused on, and those were seen as the ones that could accelerate and could be, you know, maximizing the investment of donors in those 5 areas could actually deliver fast and quicker those are sustainable and those efficient results. And so those were access to finance, climate services and data, working with non-governmental actors such as academia, civil society, the private sector, the local level communities, etc. The potential role of regional and triangular cooperation, and then a cross-cutting module which looks at effective development cooperation. Now, I could spend all day talking about all of those because there's a lot that we managed to uncover in each of those, but I'll just be giving you an example of how we've actually structured the module, one of them, the one on climate finance access. And because all of these modules are structured in the same way, that we are looking first at the context, what's happening there, what is the landscape of current support approaches, and then we zoom into these to see which are the most effective and which ones have not been developed but are actually happening, or are activities that are happening that could contribute indirectly to what to developing the capacity of SIDS on climate change. In the area of climate finance, I mean, there's over 1,000 avenues for a developing country to get finance from donors, from a variety of donors. But in this case, and that also, of course, affects small and developing states. And to some extent, the distinction between development finance and climate finance, in the case of SIDS, for example, may be an artificial one. But we also found that over 16 initiatives are precisely targeting small and developing states to access climate finance. But we also see that the challenge remains the challenge of access, the challenge of accreditation. They both remain still elusive. They were not there at the right point where we can say we have achieved greater capacities or lower vulnerabilities. In fact, the IPCC and the literature are telling us that the former, so capacities are lower today, or are not, or stagnant at best, and the vulnerabilities are increasing. There is an issue with the coordination and the coherence, and also the local, taking into consideration the local context in many of these initiatives. Was then look at, as I said, direct entry points for donors, and then some other broader systemic entry points that could have a positive impact on developing the capacity related to climate change. And some of the activities, and perhaps some of the panelists later may want to pick up on those, were related to surging capacities with embedding advisors in those institutions, not having parallel implementation units, and providing end-to-end support. So that is supporting the SIDS from the project drafting, from the project proposal drafting and accreditation process until the end of the process, when the funds arrive and the project has to be implemented. In terms of systemic entry points or indirect entry points, the approaches that seem to work have to do with broadening the lens of capacity development and looking at using a range of organizational, individual, and systemic capacity development modalities, making sure that more donors work on mobilizing domestic resources and helping the SIDS mobilize those resources, which would then increase the resilience and perhaps allow for further funds going into climate change. Helping SIDS tap into innovative finance, we see that there is a range of green, blue bonds, swaps, even resilience for debt for resilience swaps, nature for debt swaps. Those are growing but require more capacity. A final element that was highlighted in the report is this nascent idea of coordinating remittances for green objectives that is currently being piloted in the Pacific context. And so the overall conclusions, and with this I'll stop, is to show you the set of overall conclusions that the report will be making. And of course, we look very much forward to this event and to also continue discussing with you to refine these as we move forwards towards the final publication phase, to the launch of the report at COP28, and hopefully to also use this report to inform the SIDS4 conference and the preparations for this until next year. And so basically and briefly, some recommendations for the donors in this case would be to be more flexible, to continue engaging in climate finance access, but also to provide more finance for SIDS, to focus on new types of partnerships with different type of actors, to reconsider or revise donor exit strategies as they are set at the moment, to provide greater support and more coherent support in one of the most fragmented areas of development cooperation, which is the area of climate data, but also that would underpin climate services, to look for dividends through more systemic climate and development approaches, harnessing the value of regional and also triangular cooperation approaches, especially in the Africa region and Indian Ocean region, where we could find that compared to the Caribbean and the Pacific is largely underserved through these modalities. And then finally, to focus on ocean-based sectors, which can provide a lot of benefits for these countries. I'm not sure how do I exit, but this is my presentation. Here you have the contact details, and yeah, as I said, I look forward to the discussion later, and thank you so much for your attention. Over to you.
Thank you, Juan, for that very informative presentation. I particularly found the findings about climate finance, ODA, sort of support on climate finance to be very telling, and it lines up pretty well with the global picture as well, that climate finance and ODA support is on the rise, and yet if you look at the distribution, it is uneven, it is unequal. And as we move towards discussions on loss and damage, and that becomes more apparent with the discussions on the fund, I think the findings will be very helpful for the donor community to take into account these lessons. So thanks for that. Colleagues, the chat box is open for questions. If you have any questions for any of the presenters as we move through the discussion, please feel free to post questions. At the end, hopefully we will have some time for a number of questions. So please use the chat box as needed. Now, let me turn to Maximilian. He will talk about the potential of SIDS to SIDS peer learning and cooperation for climate change. Maximilian, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bahare. Thank you, Juan, as well for your presentation, and to the PCCB network for this platform. Good afternoon, evening, good morning to all. Let me share the presentation. Can you all see the presentation? Super. Thank you so much. I would like, so as Bahare said, my name is Maxime Pardo. I'm SIDS advisor at UNDESA. I would like here to, in line with what Juan presented, just to contribute to set the scene and present going from challenges that SIDS are facing and talk more about opportunities, and how one specific aspect that is actually mentioned in the report that Juan presented, which is partnership, but more particularly how SIDS to SIDS peer learning and cooperation could actually accelerate the development of solutions, for SIDS by SIDS. So let me quickly dive into the table of content, which has 5 main points really about this SIDS dynamic. First, I will quickly, because I assume that you all are aware of that, and Juan mentioned that as well, talk about the unique but common SIDS features and development challenges. From that, we are going to then discuss from those challenges what are the shared opportunities for SIDS. and specifically how common technical solutions by SIDS, for SIDS, can be developed through SIDS cooperation. Fourth, I will quickly zoom in on some of the SIDS advocacy power in major international agreements that actually, as you know, intergovernmental work is guiding also capacity development work. So it's also very important. And five, really, I'm going to mention some SIDS to SIDS initiatives, and that will be aligned as well with the presentations that will be done by the panelists later. So really the first point is something that we all are aware of, but I just mentioned that as a background for the for setting the scene. The small size of SIDS, their dependence on travel, trade, the narrow resource-based economies, their isolation, the high cost for transport, communication, energy, extreme vulnerabilities, the fact that they have fragile ecosystems because of their endemism, their debt situation, lack of access to concessional financing. Just to give some figures, because those are just words, so just to give some figures. So the smallest SIDS we are talking about, it's one of those, it's Tuvalu. We're talking about 30 square kilometer. In terms of dependence on trade and travel, on average, 30% of the GDP for SIDS is on tourism. So this says a lot about the potential of economic shocks. In terms of isolation, out of the 50 countries that are the least connected in the world, 29 are SIDS. Also, in terms of endemism, what we mean by that is by nature, the species, the population in SIDS are small, specialized, and quite small, localized. This means that any shock in the country can actually drive that population to extinction. So all those aspects are very well detailed in the Samoa pathway in other documents, and this is why we say that SIDS are a special case for sustainable development. This is also why for the past 30 years SIDS have been advocating at high level to to develop a multidimensional. Sorry for the noise in the background. Are advocating for the development of multidimensional vulnerability index that incorporate their specific vulnerabilities and challenges. All of this is well documented in international frameworks, declarations that you all know, I guess, from the Samoa pathway to the 2030 agenda, the Sendai framework, Addis Ababa action agenda, the 3 Rio conventions, including the climate change one. Some specific reports actually have been also diving into this. So just so quickly to mention 2 without entering into this, but you have a quick code where you can have access to them together with EOSIS that will actually do a presentation later. UNDESA did 2 gap assessment on biodiversity objectives. So what are the gaps that SIDS are facing to implement biodiversity objectives, and what are the gaps that SIDS are facing to implement DRR objectives? And this is really illustrating the key challenges I mentioned before in terms of also means of implementation. So now from challenges to shared opportunities. So SIDS are small, but we are also talking about big ocean states, guardians of the ocean. So there are opportunities related to that. I just mentioned a few here as well to give figures, because I think it's important to put this into perspective. The exclusive economic zone of Mauritius and Seychelles only is actually an area bigger than India. Sorry, my screen is full. SIDS make up a vast share of the world coastline. 40%, 14% actually of the world coastline. 19% of coral reefs in the world are in SIDS, and we all know how vulnerable are coral reefs to climate change, and how coral reef play a key role for livelihood, food security of the people, for the ecosystem of the fisheries. Another point, it's if we take and from an environmental economic angle, if we take actually how much it costs actually one reef shark for consumption, we are talking about over $100. But if we analyze how much actually the lifespan of one reef shark is, a study has been done in Palau, and actually in terms of tourism, potential for the diving industry and all that, one reef shark can actually give up to 2 million. Contribute to 2 million in the country. So as the former president of Seychelles mentioned, blue economy is the next frontier of our development. So now from some technical solutions, moving to specific technical solutions and cities cooperation. Just to show that SIDS, there is a lot of potential among SIDS to learn from each other. They've been front runners in sustainable development on this, and I guess our colleague from GLISPA will also further talk about this. But Seychelles, for example, is one of the first country establishing blue bond. Fiji is among the first country to pilot ocean accounting. Related to the national data system of the country. Belize is the first country in the Americas with depth swapped for ocean. St. Lucia committed to have a marine reserve, which is the size of Germany. Palau also committed to have a national marine sanctuary, which is 2 times the size of Mexico. If we talk about the overall global plastic trade, we are talking about that this actually is worth 1 trillion in 2018. Only if we take SIDS, SIDS exported over 200 million of plastic already. So, but you can see the huge contribution, and this is actually an underestimated figure. So now, how could we leverage that SIDS to SIDS peer learning and cooperation potential, and to actually boost replication, expansion of good practices and solutions? So this is something that UNDESA is actually doing in some of their initiatives in partnership with partners. Some of them are actually present in this panel. It does a 3-phased matchmaking process. Actually, what we hear, even if a lot of partners practitioners are talking about SIDS cooperation, what we see a lot happening actually is the phase 1 that you see here on the screen, which is about peer learning workshops, which is very important, very great, essential, where actually there is actually an increased knowledge and awareness about what are the solutions, best practices out there. But very often, not always, but very often, it stayed at this level. So we organize a workshop that can be virtual or can be on site, but then people go back to their country, and there is no really transfer of knowledge at technical level. So we really encourage to go through a phase 2 and phase 3. Phase 2, which would be about really increasing understanding about SIDS know-how transfer opportunities with a cooperation roadmap where we can really see what SIDS A can offer to SIDS B, and if SIDS B is willing to actually transfer his knowledge to that. And then a phase 3 where actually this is actually implemented. where there is actually a physical, transfer of knowledge between, for example, two seeds. And I think we should be able to, to support this A to Z, process, and not just to stop at phase one. There are so much potential on this. I'll talk further about that, and I hope also the panelists, I'm sure, will talk about that. And then the fourth point is about the SIDS advocacy power in international agreements. So SIDS are maybe small but big players on the international scene. One example here is what SIDS have done for the Paris climate negotiations. They are the ones that steered the 1.5 degree that is now in the Paris Agreement, is in great part because of the SIDS advocacy. The SIDS special circumstances are actually mentioned in the Paris Agreement, and some prioritization, even if there are many barriers, and actually Juan talked about that, is the SIDS prioritization is actually also in the climate financing. And this has been done in great part through EOSIS that we'll talk also later. And another coalition also more linked to biodiversity and the CBD, but of course always connected, has also emerged, which is the Small Islands Developing States Coalition for nature. So some example of initiatives, I will not explain them all, but there's one I just mentioned, the SIDS Coalition for Nature, which is co-led by Belize, Cape Verde, Samoa, and Seychelles. There is another initiative under the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which is actually the SIDS Ecosystem Restoration flagship, which is led by Comoros, St. Lucia, and Vanuatu. There are two others linked also to two of the priority areas that Juan mentioned just before, the FINS initiative, the Financing for SIDS initiative, which is supported by UNDESA across the three SIDS regions, and the DATAS initiative, which is done in the three regions of SIDS as well. So I will here only dive into the Small Island Developing States Coalition for Nature, and just to say that SIDS have managed to have actually now a coalition of 30 governments, which involve 16 SIDS members, as well as 14 friends that are potential financing partners. That has been launched last December at COP15. If you want to have a view on an international media coverage, but you can scan the quick code here. But just what is this coalition about? Is really about advocacy as well, but also to develop and facilitate gap bridging partnership development in areas where SIDS really are facing challenges, including data and finance, as Juan mentioned. The entire rationale for this is actually in this report developed with EOSIS, but you can download it here through the quick code. And the coalition had three priorities. Again, priority one is financing, which is in line with what Juan mentioned. Priority two is about data and tech transfer, also in line with what Juan mentioned. And priority three, it's really about synergies among conventions. In particular, the three Rio conventions. And as a cross-cutting, the SIDS cooperation is really recommended. Only this year and here, there are three key milestones. They are all here. I will not explain them all, but just the first one, the first column. Next month, at the high-level political forum, the coalition is going to launch a proposal for SIDS cooperation on financing solutions for nature, for example. So that it's actually aligned with what has been mentioned further. And at the 2023 Steering Committee on SIDS Partnerships, a lot of support has been given to the coalition, and Spain in particular provided, made a statement to again support the coalition. Priority number 2 on data, and supporting the Caribbean through SIDS cooperation at the regional level. Conclusion, I mean, despite the fact that SIDS are on the front line of multiple crises, they've showed, I mean, global leadership in advocacy for their own circumstances. They've been key players in spearheading innovative solutions and accelerate transformative sustainable development. But further support is needed, of course, and boosting SIDS peer learning and cooperation represent a unique opportunity, not the only one, but a unique opportunity to accelerate the 2030 agenda implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maximilian, for that presentation. I think you did an excellent job of sort of highlighting challenges and opportunities within SIDS when it comes to capacity development on issues related to climate change from the macro perspective. And so now that we'll move on to the panel discussion, and I think the panel will be a good complementarity to the two presentations that we've heard to see specifically what's happening at the national level within countries and as part of the work that is being done on day-to-day basis with the SIDS on climate change. So let me briefly introduce the panel first. And I will ask all the panelists to please put your videos on. We have Mr. John Calixe. He's the National Project Coordinator from the Department of Sustainable Development of the Ministry of Education of St. Lucia. We have Mr. Miguel Calante and Ms. Paola Pereira. Miguel is the policy officer from the Environment and the Environment and Climate Focal Point, and Paola is the head of cooperation at the Embassy of Portugal in Sao Tome and Principe. We have Ms. Anne Ramsmison. She is the climate lead for the Alliance of Small Island States. We have Mr. Hevanik Henry. He's the Commonwealth Secretariat and member of the Caribbean Youth Environment Network. He is also part of a member of the UNSG Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. We have Dr. Isabella Massa. She's a senior economist from the Sustainable Development Solutions Network in Paris. And lastly, we have Ms. Kate Brown. She's the executive director of the Global Island Partnership. Thank you so much for being with us, everyone, and welcome. Let me start with John first. John, can you tell us a little bit about St. Lucia's experience when it comes to strengthening national capacity and this SIDS peer learning opportunities that we also heard about from Maximilian? Over to you, John.
Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to some of the participants as well. I'm going to respond to your question, moderator, by sharing our experience as a SIDS through two of our projects, the flagship project, which is something that we're about to implement sometime in the future, and how it complements one of our projects financed by Jeff, which we call the Southeast Coast Project. The actual name is the Integrated Ecosystem Management and Forest Management of the Southeast Coast in St. Lucia. So let me first thank the organizers and to show our appreciation for the invitation to this important webinar. And secondly, the government of St. Lucia is extremely pleased to share its perspective as a SIDS country on this important topic we are discussing today. It's my pleasure to illustrate how, as a SIDS, we walk the talk on integrated climate and nature actions through the lens of the SIDS flagship initiative that we are co-leading with the UN Decade on Ecosystems Restoration with two other SIDS, Comoros and Vanuatu, and not forgetting the support from UNEP, FAO, and UNDESA. Indeed, ecosystem restoration is a key strategy for achieving a net zero future, providing opportunities for climate mitigation, adaptation, and sustainable economic development. Scaling up investments in restoration is critical to meet those goals, as well as forging a stronger collaboration between private financial institutions or entities, governments, multilateral organizations, and local communities. Under these perspectives, my presentation will be twofold, or in two components. First, I will present the SIDS flagship, its objective and scope in St. Lucia, Hopefully, this will open interesting discussions on challenges and opportunities for increasing restoration finance in SIDS. And secondly, in line with the previous speakers, I will highlight how the SIDS Flagship Initiative, in partnership with the SIDS Coalition for Nature, is also designed to be a platform for partnership building, SIDS cooperation, and exchange on promising solutions for financing, projects, and business models that serve as a blueprint for replicable and scalable approaches. With regards to part one, let me begin by indicating that this SIDS flagship is designed to ensure that marine and coastal ecosystem restoration and conservation is integrated into COVID-19 economic recovery and growth through a connected ridge-to-reef approach to ensure SIDS build back better and bluer. As such, the SIDS flagship is guided by the 10 principles of ecosystems restoration. SIDS are the guardians of the ocean, and unlocking the blue economy potential is really what the SIDS flagship is all about. According to a recent report from mid-2021, each dollar invested in the sustainable ocean economy is estimated to yield an average of $5 in return. Restoring and conserving fragile island marine and ecosystems can greatly strengthen and diversify SIDS economies, making them more resilient to future shocks, including climate change. The SIDS flagship will therefore address this economy environment nexus by focusing on the innovative approaches to policymaking, financing, and management of ocean and coastal ecosystems, which are needed to transition towards a sustainable blue economy. In practical terms and through an incremental approach, the first two components of the SIDS flagship will support the integrated ecosystems management and restoration of forests on the Southeast Coast, financed by Jeff, which we call the Southeast Coast Project, at 2 levels. At the local level, the SIDS flagship will focus on interventions in Southeast Coast in a view to enable local communities and businesses to be involved with restoration activities for the development of nature-based businesses and alternative livelihoods. For St. Lucia, for example, it will assist local communities in the Southeast Coast to identify alternative sustainable livelihood opportunities, in addition to increasing value of existing activities such as fishing and seamoss farmers or farming through more sustainable practices. In Vanuatu, the SIDS flagship will support the co-development of marine protected areas management plans between MPA managers and local communities in North Ufate and the Maskin Islands, and will ensure better integration of indigenous and local knowledge. In Comoros, the flagship will finance incubator programs to develop private sector partnerships with local businesses, and if successful, this approach can be applied to other MPAs in Comoros and scale up across the flagship and other SIDS communities. At the national level, the flagship will also foster an enabling environment for restoration through transition to a blue economy. This includes assessment and consolidation of existing knowledge, programs, policies, and plans to identify opportunities for upscaling restoration initiatives, which will inform and enable sustainable blue economy transitions. Dear colleagues, for the second component of my presentation, let me begin by saying that the SIDS flagship is also a strategic partner of the SIDS Coalition for Nature, which currently has 30 governments made up of SIDS and non-SIDS countries, including St. Lucia, of course. Launched at a high level at COP15, the coalition is a platform for gap-bridging partnerships for SIDS in the nature agenda. Calling for increased support to financing solutions for nature, to data and technology for nature, and the synergies among the 3 Rio conventions, the coalition also strongly promotes SIDS peer learning and cooperation as a cross-cutting approach. Against this background, the SIDS flagship, co-led by St. Lucia, will also ensure regional and global outreach to facilitate SIDS peer learning, technical exchange and cooperation, to uptake and expand best practices on blue economy within and between the 3 SIDS regions, using the lessons learned and results achieved. The SIDS flagship will also promote and develop innovative approaches for SIDS holistic coastal conservation and restoration in practice through increased synergies between the UN Restoration and Ocean Science Decades and strategic guidance and advocacy provided by the SIDS Coalition for Nature. Finally, let me conclude by indicating that the SIDS flagship was awarded as one of the first global restoration flagships and our permanent secretary, Mr. Nita Montour, received the award during World Restoration Day in 2022 on behalf of the 3 co-leading SIDS. This shows once again how SIDS are leading by example. Because one video, I would like to present a short 5-minute film video on the SIDS flagship. Please enjoy, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John. I think we are a little bit pressed for time, and the schedule is running a little bit behind what we had anticipated. So what we want to do is we would like to, we will share the link to the video in the chat box. We will go through the interventions. And then if once everyone has spoken, we may play the video if there's sufficient time. Thank you so much. And I hope you're okay with that, John. And the video link is in the chat box for everyone to enjoy. Let's now go to our colleagues from Portugal. We have Michele and Paula, who will tell us, share perspectives from the Portuguese experience on SIDS and capacity building within some of the SIDS countries when it comes to climate change. Michele, the floor is yours, and I believe Paula is coming after you.
Yes, indeed. Well, good morning, Pahare. Good afternoon, colleagues in Europe and Africa, and good evening for Timor-Leste and the Pacific SIDS. Well, first of all, on behalf of Camões Institute, I would like to thank the organization of this relevant event for the kind invitation that you addressed to the Portuguese Development Cooperation Agency to participate in this panel discussion. And in what regards to Portugal, our development cooperation related to SIDS is based. I'm trying to put the presentation. Is it okay? Everyone is watching the slide presentation? Okay, thank you. So it's based on the new Portuguese Development Cooperation Strategy 2030. I will attach to the chat a brief summary and the booklet in English. But as I was telling, this new development cooperation strategy was adopted last November, and I would like to highlight that it's structured around the 5 Ps, the 5 pillars of the Agenda 2030. And thematically, human development is a central thematic focus of the Portuguese development cooperation. And also in what regards to the guiding principles, environmental protection and the fight against climate change based in the Paris Agreement is also an important aspect of our cooperation, which is very based on the needs of the partner countries. And that's one of the aspects, I believe, it makes the difference regarding the Portuguese development cooperation. In what regards to the geographic approach, Portugal prioritizes the Portuguese-speaking African countries and also Timor-Leste, having also a specific focus on LDCs and SIDS, namely Cabo Verde, Guinea-Bissau, Saint Tomé Príncipe, and Timor-Leste. And accordingly to the development cooperation profiles launched this week by the OECD, among DAC countries, Portugal has the highest share of gross ODA allocated to LDCs in 2021, about 70% of our ODA, and also has a high share of ODA allocated to SIDS, about 40%. But in what regards to the development cooperation strategy action framework, the planet pillar aims to strengthen environmental action and has a strong focus on climate action and green transition, as you can see from that from the image. I would like to note that the Portuguese Environmental Corporation specifically has a decentralized approach, mostly based on the bilateral cooperation funded by the Environmental Fund of the Environment and Climate Action Ministry. And there is a pledge to allocate about 5 million euros a year until 2030 on this aspect. So, in what regards to the action on the ground, and before handing the floor to Paulo Pereira in São Tomé e Príncipe, I would like to highlight the capacity development needs expressed by the national authorities in São Tomé and Príncipe was addressed to the strategic cooperation program. We have one strategic program for each of our main partner countries. And in what regards to climate action, the needs were mostly addressed to the reinforcement of institutional capacities, the technical support for problems in the energy sector, and also for training and certification of technicians. Most of these aspects related to the energy sector. So that being said, I would now give the floor to São Tomé. So good morning, Paula. Good morning, no, good afternoon. The floor is yours.
Mike, now you can hear me now, I think. Is my mic working?
It's working, Paula.
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Miguel, and thank you so much to the OECD and to UNDESA for this analytical work, which will surely be important guidance in the future. And thank you also for the opportunity to share our views and experience in the country. Let me first and foremost, I should warn you, I don't have high skills in time management, but the most important part of my intervention is in the end, so please bear with me. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our views and experience in São Tomé, but let me first and foremost give you a very quick snapshot of the country. São Tomé and Príncipe is the second smallest African country. It has approximately 220,000 inhabitants and, at least officially, 1,001 square kilometers, but actually coastal erosion has already reduced this area in a significant manner. GDP in 2022 was about 500 million euros, which is quite low. And actually, GDP growth has actually been decreasing since 2020, first due to the impact of the pandemic, and more recently of the war in Ukraine. The inflation rate earlier this year was about 24%. The social and economic impact of the pandemic was tremendous, given vulnerability to shocks, and also the impact of the war, which has derailed efforts to recover. São Toméan efforts and partner support are in most SIDS, as in most SIDS, undermined by the country's vulnerabilities. Maximilian has already mentioned, I would say here in São Tomé, the weight of the informal economy, lack of integration into global value chains, connectivity, low institutional and human capacity, dependency, of course, on external finance, but dependency on fossil fuels, climate change, and the rise of sea levels are probably the most striking problems that the country faces. The devastating effects of floods occurred in December 2021 and March 2022, coupled with a high dependency on agriculture and tourism, also led to a substantial drop in the per capita income and produced a profound impact in some areas, including loss of livelihoods and the destruction of fundamental infrastructures. On domestic resources, domestic revenues are slim due to limited capacity to raise tax revenue. The VAT was just now introduced earlier this month, with a rate of 15%, and the private sector and foreign direct investment are also low, and remittances is not as significant as they are in other developing countries. São Tomé and Príncipe currently faces one of the most difficult economic conditions in recent years, driven by a dramatic rise in inflation of imported goods. Fuel and food account for about 80% of imports of goods, but also a slow recovery of tourism and difficulty in attracting external finance, especially, of course, concessional external finance. The country faces recurring failures in energy supply. Thermal power stations, some of which are quite old, often face breaks in activity. This month, we had a shortage of fuel that lasted for more than 2 weeks, and which in fact paralyzed the country. São Tomé has a high dependency on fuel imports, which also impacts on the significant debts to supplying countries and on the capacity of the country to finance other activities. The current government has committed to carry out reforms that include energy transition, including reducing fuel consumption by around 25%. And negotiations are ongoing with development banks and UNDP for the construction of hydroelectric and photovoltaic power plants. Despite the high dependency on external finance, the country does not have many development partners. From the DAC member list, only Portugal and the EU are present in the country, although there is some financing channeled by some other DAC members through UN agencies. The World Bank is the biggest donor, followed by Portugal, and afterwards the African Development Bank and the European Union. São Tomé is in fact one of our main beneficiary countries. In the last decade, the accumulated value of ODA was around 200 million euros. As Miguel highlighted, our bilateral cooperation program is context specific, which is key, aligned with the priorities and needs identified by national authorities, and was a result of a participated and inclusive process to support ownership and leadership. Long-term and sustainable commitment is, in our opinion, key for any developing country, but especially in the case of a small island developing state. The current strategic program reinforced the commitment to the country development, although in fact, São Tomé is graduating from the LDC group next year in 2024. Given the country's enormous needs throughout almost every sector, we have still a considerable focus on human development, education, and health, and capacity building, human and institutional capacity building in most of policy sectors. This focus on capacity building stems from the recognition that strengthening national systems and the ability of the state to provide public services is the backbone of any sustainable development process. This focus also benefits from the Portuguese cooperation decentralized model, which is in fact an added value, where support is provided by experts, especially when it comes to training and technical assistance from line ministries in Portugal in a peer-to-peer model. Climate, energy, and environment stand as priority areas of intervention, although the financial envelope for these sectors is not one of the highest, given the nature of interventions, which are mostly technical assistance and training. Cooperation activities developed over the last 5 years in these sectors have been leveraged by our environmental fund, as Miguel pointed out. Between 2017 and 2019, this support was provided mostly through technical assistance granted to the water and electricity company of São Tomé, which is also a state-owned enterprise with serious constraints, and support provided to solid waste processing centers, biodiversity, and some other projects. Portuguese NGOs are also very present in the country in these sectors, especially Oikos, with both funding from our development agency and other donors such as European Union. But to go to the subject directly to the subject of this seminar, and I'm sorry for the long introduction. Regarding good practices on capacity development for climate change in São Tomé, I would focus on the two projects for carbon sustainability, supported by the Portuguese Corporation through the Environmental Fund and implemented by the African Foundation. These two projects are key to provide both institutional and technical capacity development. Between 2020 and 2021, we implemented a project, one of these projects in the autonomous region of Prince, called the Roadmap for Carbon Sustainability of the Prince Island. Its main objective was to contribute to the economic growth of the island and the reduction of its greenhouse gas emissions. I would say that this project was a complete success. It mapped the current situation in relation to emissions vis-à-vis carbon capture and outlined socioeconomic development scenarios for the various sectors of activity until 2015, while transferring knowledge and capacitating the island authorities, as well as other relevant actors in the different components of the project. I know we don't like
Paula,
to...
we really need to wrap up. If you can please wrap up in the next minute, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. The project implementation team was composed by local and international members, so it was a mix. Several capacity building sessions were made to improve technical capacity, and the African Foundation was established in the island to execute the project. Government officials were also trained to further monitor the implementation of the roadmap and gather information towards its SOCEC and midterm review. Furthermore, in taking into consideration the positive outcomes of this first project, in 2022, we approved funding for broadening this work also to the island of São Tomé. The objectives are the same. The idea is to develop a roadmap until 2015 for the country, and of course, capacity building and awareness raising are very important parts of the project. For instance, we established a partnership with the São Tomean University, involving about 60 science teachers and students trained to join the survey fieldwork teams. The project also provided technical training for institutional agencies in several departments and stakeholders throughout the project. To wrap up, despite all concerns inherent to small islands, Portuguese Corporation in São Tomé is providing support for institutional capacity development, guided by the roadmap design projects. It is too early to have a clear notion of its impacts, but my personal evaluation of the process is positive so far. So that's it. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry for taking so long.
Thank you so much, Miguel and Paula, for the comprehensive overview of the Portuguese engagements within the SIDS context, and particularly São Tomé and Príncipe. Let me move on quickly now to Jevanik. So Jevanik, over to you to share perspectives from the youth. How is youth engaging in this issue of capacity development vis-à-vis climate change?
Yes, thanks. First of all, let me just thank, as usual, OECD, UNDESA, and PCCB Network for this opportunity. And of course, always good to connect, especially on matters relating to SIDS. Definitely from the youth perspective, certainly, I think we all understand the importance of ensuring that the youth input and how crucial that is, particularly as we get to a stage where we're seeing the increase in vulnerability, and that we essentially need all stakeholders on board. And the youth input is actually quite crucial. So of course, here from the Caribbean Youth Environment Network, just as a background, it's one of the leading youth-led environmental entities in the Caribbean region. which essentially works towards creating an appropriate space for young people to participate in the development, also the implementation and the promotion of sort of sustainable environmental policies and programs across the Caribbean, with over 15 chapters across the region. So within that, I just want to focus on sort of 4 key areas as to how we sort of envision, but how we also push that capacity development from the youth perspective, particularly in the region. And of course, we work with partners from the Pacific and so on, speaking about that whole SIDS cooperation. So looking at it from one to the advocacy end, and that is at the core of what we do, in a sense that I think we can all go back to 1.5, the Stay Alive campaign, and particularly as a network, we played a crucial role in that regard, not only in supporting the voice of SIDS, but also in engaging young people and bringing in sort of new players into the space. In fact, that was actually my entry point into the climate space. So within that advocacy effort, we're able to sort of engage young people in understanding what exactly is happening within the negotiations, what exactly is the importance of 1.5, and sort of create that sort of wider approach. Secondly, looking at policy involvement, and policy, it's not just in the design, but we also support young people in seeing how can we involve in the design, implementation, but also monitoring and evaluation. So in many of our chapters, we'll be serving on various national boards, particularly national climate change committees and so on, where we actually provide that practical input at all stages, because it's crucial that we have the youth input at all stages, because that is essential if we are to ensure that we have that sustainable approach to building capacity. And of course, at the action, and I think one of the things we try to do is that we work with various stakeholders to ensure that in developing our capacity building program, it is inclusive. It takes into account the needs of indigenous groups, takes into account the needs of marginalized communities, because that is how we can really and truly promote that holistic approach to supporting the national agenda when it comes to capacity development for climate action. And at the heart of it all is partnerships. And one thing which we recognize as youth and as young people and youth-led organization is that there's only so much we can do on our own, but it is crucial that we bring in key players, particularly the private sector. Within SIDS, yes, our private sectors can be a bit, limited, but at the same time, if we continue to reach out and build that sort of wider approach, where we have private sector, we are bringing other NGOs, we are bringing other youth-led entities, and of course, having governments as partners. We've seen through our programming across the region that how this has allowed us to help and also have a meaningful impact in ensuring that the youth input within capacity development is not just seen in isolation, but there's that mutual exchange, where we build a cadre of young people who are better able to support the national climate action efforts, but also the efforts of young people are able to contribute to the national efforts in ensuring that, of course, we enhance access to climate finance, and of course, we are able to deliver on our climate goals. And just to add one thing, I think it's important to recognize that now that we've seen new approaches to finance, I would try not to use the word innovative, but at the same time, we've seen new approaches and new windows, but there is also a concern to see how can we ensure that there is a dedicated facilities not only for young people or youth-led entities to access, but how do we ensure that the youth-led entities have the capacity to develop that sort of beyond just a project approach, but rather that programmatic approach, as we believe this is crucial to ensuring that we have the sustainable approach towards ensuring and supporting the capacity development of young people. So just wanted to sort of just point out these few things in terms of advocacy, policy, and the action, and of course partnerships, which we try to ensure that we keep at the heart of it all, to ensure that we can have an amplified impact, and it's not just seen in isolation. I think I will stop there in the interest of time, if that's...
Thank you so much, Yamane. Also, thank you for being succinct and straight to the point. Let me turn to Anne now. Anne, over to you to share lessons learned and on challenges and opportunities from the UOSIS perspective. Anne, over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present on some of the good practices and lessons learned from the UOSIS perspective. And thank you also to the organizers for allowing us the time and the space to discuss these very important capacity needs, but also important opportunities for small island developing states to continue to engage in the many international commitments and outcomes that we have pledged to. And when it comes down to the grassroots and to the level, at the government level, at the NGOs, at the youth level, it's very important to understand what's happening in the global arena and then making that connection at the local level. Thank you for the opportunity. And it's very great to see one of our fellows, who's currently a AOSIS fellows at the moment here in New York, who spoke just before me on some of the very good practices that the young people are leading in the Caribbean, but I also believe that's similar to also what's happening in the other SIDS region. Some of the opportunities we believe, I think just before we start with capacity building, especially for SIDS, there is no one size fits all kind of program. It has to be tailored to the specific needs, and the needs evolve with the changing global commitments. So it's always important for the organizations who are also developing these programs to really keep that in mind with the programs for small island developing states. We do understand that the Paris Agreement under Article 11 talks about enhancing effective climate action, in particular LDCs and SIDS, of course, and mainstreaming of further action, capacity building across the thematic areas. Capacity building framework for developing countries in the Paris Agreement highlight that capacity building should be country-driven, based on countries' needs and priorities, and foster country ownership. And it's very important to hear from one of our young persons, people who's in the AOSIS fellowship, that the young people play a pivotal role in developing ambitious climate action and in shaping the way in which they empower other young people. Capacity building is key to enabling the potential of youth as agents of change, and of course leading a role in capacity building efforts and capacity builders that they are. So it's a continuous program where we transfer that knowledge to the next generation and so forth. One of the examples that we've had as AOSIS, capacity building initiatives needs to be SIDS driven, as I've said. It can't be determined from different places outside of the SIDS. It has to be determined within the SIDS context and created by SIDS. One of the examples that we have had, I think, for the last almost 10 years is the award-winning AOSIS fellowship funded by the Italian government. This program, capacity building program responds to the needs of SIDS by providing a 12-month training to early career professionals from SIDS, which one of our fellows just spoke before me is part of this fellowship right now, and it builds the knowledge and skills required to become negotiators and advocates on behalf of the country. They are stationed in New York, providing the needed additional capacity to the permanent missions to the UN, and also gaining work experience on a multitude of UN issues. They participate and contribute to the national delegations and attend at least 2 international negotiations, such as either the climate change COP and other negotiations such as plastic, BBNJ, and other agreements. In the end, it means one more trained climate professional is added to the national government and to the SIDS community. It enables more effective participations and continuations in the international negotiations. We have a few success stories of these fellowship programs. We have a few fellows who have graduated from the 12-month program, have returned to their country. Some has become ministers of the environment. Some have become directors of multiple multilateral agreements in the different foreign affairs units. So these are some of the very good examples of the continuation of this knowledge building and capacity building. And the partnership with the Italian government and AOSIS is an example of meaningful partnerships. And the fellowship itself is driven by SIDS. Meaningful contributions. We have guest lectures by the different scientists, but also we have our own people leading, becoming very good lecturers, fellows, coordinators from the SIDS regions themselves, and they are teaching and transferring this knowledge to our very own younger early career professionals. So this is I think it's a good practice that we have learned going forward. And because this webinar talks about good practices, lessons learned, capacity building in all different organizations such as OECD, UNFCCC, PCCB, it's very important to share these lessons learned to understand some of the best practices that I also wish to bring from some of our SIDS regions, like the Pacific. We have an online learning platform within the Pacific Climate Change Center at SPREP. It was established to serve the Pacific Island members, but also other SIDS countries who are willing to participate. And this coordinates capacity building and training through its Moodle-based platform. So it's a very learning platform where it's like a between university and also tertiary and other levels. So it's a very good course. It was established in 2020 to respond to the needs. The e-learning platform is a platform that holds executive courses on climate change, training for participants, which is endorsed by the member countries. And the platform currently has 12 courses, plus another 13 courses that have been identified in the pipeline, and to deliver on this platform. So some of the examples.
And what I would suggest, if possible, you can, if there's a link to the platform, please feel free to post it in the chat box, and colleagues are invited to check it out. I'm just trying to move things as we have less than 10 minutes left. So please, if you can wrap up, that would be great. Thank you so much, Anne.
Okay. And I think then those specific lessons learned from the courses that have been undertaken, it's very important because it's very specific needs. It captures like ecosystem-based adaptation and mitigation. It teaches on health systems and climate change, enhancing resilience. We have NDC Hub based in Fiji, which is funded by the GIZ. It supports the Pacific in the NDC implementation and support, but funding is an issue. So there's a lot of capacity building, development, but funding, how do you implement these programs? In the Caribbean, they found it effective and efficient to centralize much of the work at the 5 Cs, which is something similar to the SPREP. And it conducts training in specific analytical tools for decision making. So today, the 5 Cs has national capacity building programs in their member states, and it facilitates access and implements NDCs in its own capacity building. There's a lot of challenges, and I think one of the key challenges is in this webinar is not allocating enough time to the panelists to actually talk about these lessons learned and examples, because now we'll have to skip through all the other issues. Then what is the point of having webinars where we are here to talk about lessons and things like that, where we have to skip it? So in the interest of time and to conclude, there will always be a point where some SIDS just don't have the capacity to go at it alone. In those cases, a regional or sub-regional approach should be encouraged, and SIDS 4 will look at ways to strengthen the capacity of states, focusing on best practices, enhancing efficiencies, and ensuring that countries retain their own interests. The latter brings about its own complexities, and without careful collaboration and understanding, delays rather than enhancing actions. It's right, the organizers are talking that much of the hindrance in capacity development is generic. It is also endemic. So small population in SIDS, and in some instances, very small number of technical persons available to analyze climate data, write proposal, implement projects, hinder any truly impactful work. So that's probably a sum up from our end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne, for those valuable inputs and for those concrete examples about how capacity development is being done from the perspective of AOSIS. Let me turn to Isabella now. Isabella, over to you to let us know a little bit more about the work that the SDSN is doing vis-a-vis SIDS and climate change.
Thank you, Bahare, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to all the participants, and thanks to the organizers for inviting SDSN to this extremely relevant seminar and webinar for SIDS. So let me just try to share a brief PowerPoint that I prepare. So at SDSN, in collaboration with the UN SIDS Resident Coordinators Network, we have recently developed research on the nexus between structural vulnerabilities and education performance in SIDS. And today I would like to briefly share with you some of the key findings of our research, and also to briefly discuss the implications for climate action in SIDS. So let me quickly present you the conceptual framework of our research. So as it has been already mentioned at the beginning of this webinar by Maximilian, SIDS are a kind of a unique unique group of countries with certain common inherent characteristics like smallness, remoteness, etc. And because of these inherent characteristics, they also face a unique set of structural vulnerabilities that can be classified into three main categories: economic vulnerabilities, which refer to exposure to exogenous economic and financial shocks; structural development limitations, which are mainly geophysical constraints such as smallness and remoteness; and environmental vulnerabilities, which refers to the exposure of shocks due to climate change and natural hazards. And at the country level, these vulnerabilities can be measured by a new tool, which is the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index. And at SDSN, we developed at the very beginning a kind of prototype of the MVI that is going to be finalized by the high-level expert panel in the incoming months. And according to SDSN NBI, it appears that among all countries around the world, SIDS are the most vulnerable countries along all the three different dimensions. Although there are important differences across SIDS regions, and in particular compared to Atlantic Indian SIDS and the Caribbean SIDS, Pacific SIDS appear to be the most vulnerable in the economic, developmental, and environmental dimensions. Why it is very important to speak about structural vulnerability? It is important because in our research we show that structural vulnerabilities really affect the SDG outcomes in SIDS. And in particular today I would like to look at how structural vulnerabilities impact SIDS capacity to perform well in education, and also their capacity to mobilize the financing needed to progress on education. And it's extremely important to focus on the level of education performance in SIDS, because this is important not only to achieve SDG 4 of quality education, but we all know that quality education is also a key enabler for achieving several other SDGs, including those related to environmental protection. So within this conceptual framework, let me go straight to the key finding. The key finding that is that more vulnerable countries tend to record worse outcomes on education. As you can clearly see from the graph in the slide, where you can see that there exists a negative relationship between our measure of vulnerability, that is the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, and our measure of quality education, that is the SDG 4 score. So we can expect that SIDS that are highly vulnerable will experience also low SDG performance. But which are the channels through which structural vulnerability can affect education performance in SIDS specifically? There are different channels, and I would like to focus on 4 of them. So the first one is population displacement. In our quantitative analysis, we found that countries that are more vulnerable to environmental conditions face larger displacements of population, and on the other hand, countries with larger displacements of population after natural disasters tend to have a lower performance on education. And this is perfectly in line with what happens in SIDS, where after these countries are hit by extreme weather events, there is a significant share of the population that is displaced. Think about the 2021 earthquake in Haiti. And after this earthquake, more than 200,000 people have been displaced. And the problem is that displaced families face bigger difficulties in keeping children at school. First of all, because there is an interruption in education in the time that they are relocated, and also because displaced families experience a significant drop in income, and because of this, they often face issues in being able to pay education fees for enrolling kids in new schools. Then the second channel is represented by brain drain. So we found that countries with high levels of economic vulnerability experience a larger brain drain. This is the case of SIDS, which experience a high economic vulnerability. In particular, SIDS are characterized by undiversified economies, which offer very few opportunities for highly skilled workers that are so forced to move abroad, giving birth to the brain drain phenomena. And also SIDS are characterized by a high degree of trade openness, which creates economic instability. And this economic instability also does not provide the right incentives to high skilled workers to remain in their countries, even though they could find a job in their own countries. And this has important consequences as well on education, because it means that there are less high skilled workers in SIDS, also in the governments, and also in the education sector, in schools. I mean, there is an issue of absence of high skilled teachers, which also lower the education performance in SIDS. Then the third channel, through which structural vulnerability can affect education performance in SIDS.
Sorry, Isabella, just a reminder,
yes.
you have 1 more minute. Thank you so much.
Yes, sure. So it's the digitalization. So we found that more vulnerable countries have more difficulties to digitalize, and at the same time, SIDS, which have higher levels of digitalization, perform better on education. And on the other hand, those SIDS with low levels of digitalization have a lower education performance, and this became clear at the time of COVID-19, when it appears that SIDS that could not have enough good digitalization were not able to provide online teaching when the schools were closed. And finally, the very last channel is public outlays. So what we found is that more vulnerable countries have a lower capacity to mobilize financing for education. And we also found that low levels of public spending are associated with lower performance on education. So what are the implications for climate action? We know that quality education is important for people to be more concerned about the environment, to learn how to protect it, to learn how to adapt. So enhancing the quality of education in SIDS is extremely important, also to ensuring the achievement of the SDGs related to environmental protection. What can we do to enhance education in SIDS? First of all, to reform the international financial system by revising the eligibility criteria for concessional finance. So the only eligibility criteria right now is GDP, but we need to integrate next to GDP as a criteria for concessional finance, even a measure of structural vulnerability. We also need to reform the credit rating system so that even SIDS could have creditworthiness, and in this way they can access innovative financing tools such as SDG bonds, blue bonds, green bonds, etc. And finally, we should also try to promote the progress on digital transformation that will be important to reduce the brain drain phenomena, to guarantee access to education to children during times of crisis, as it was the COVID-19 crisis, and finally also to enable SIDS to improve the gathering of data on historical and current climatic variables that are needed for being able to assess the adaptation and loss and damage costs that they are suffering, even though they are not responsible for climate change, and they need to have these estimates of loss and damage and adaptation costs to be able to ask for repayments from responsible countries for these costs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isabella. Last but not least, Kate, over to you to share experiences from GLISPA. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you very much, and wonderful panel. And thanks to the organisers for inviting Global Partnership. I'm actually here representing the Local 2030 Islands Network, which is a network that I co-chair and which we set up in 2019 at the UN General Assembly. And it's really focused on localization of the Sustainable Development Goals in an island context. And we have members from SIDS and non-SIDS islands. I also have a network leaders meeting, so the island leaders meet every year in the margins of the UN General Assembly. It's very focused on those leaders coming together to discuss solutions to the issues that we're facing. Last year, the focus was on clean energy and the impacts of hurricanes and building after these events. I think it's really important that when we're thinking about capacity building, that sort of dialogue also takes place. But I'm here really to focus on, we have in that network also 3 communities of practice. And I've been working in SIDS capacity building for more than 25 years, something like that, long time. A lot of what we're doing now with our communities of practice is building on our experience of catalytic capacity building in the context of small island developing states, taking into account all of the issues that people have highlighted and how we do things that can kind of be transformative. And at the same time, we've been working with the Low Emission Development Strategies Global Partnership, or what's now called the Global Partnership for Climate Action, I think, who have been running communities of practice for moving not just SIDS, but it includes SIDS along on climate resilient development. So we're kind of, from that, we built 3 communities of practice in the network. One is on sustainable and regenerative tourism. So obviously tourism is a key issue for islands, including for SIDS. The other is on resilient and clean energy systems. So we're working on moving that out. And then the third is on data for climate resilience. And we hear a lot about the data issue, particularly in the SIDS context, as a real issue. And we're looking at how can a community of practice help islands kind of move through that. Our model, though, I think is really important. And as I said, it's built on a whole range of things, including some really important capacity building initiatives, such as micronations and conservation and a bunch of learning networks and approaches. There's a lot that's been done. There's a lot that's been tried. And so we're trying to learn from that and work forward. So what we learn is that really to make change on these things, we need to bring diverse groups together. So not just the government, not just NGOs, etc., to learn from each other, challenge each other, and share resources. Those 3 things are really important. We believe that the critical elements of doing community practice are about this development of a group vision. And 2 months ago in Hawaii, we held our first in-person communities of practice meetings of the data community of practice and the tourism one. We did it together so that there would be cross-pollination between those 2 issues. But we paid for more than 60 participants from SIDS, usually 2 people from every island from around the world, including in the Atlantic and Indian Ocean region, as well as others. And in our community of practice, our focus is, as I said, the group vision. And so we have a group vision that has come out of this community of practice that also meets online and it meets in person. And it's a mix. We're funding the government representatives, but there's also NGO representatives can take part as well. And I think the important things about this approach is it really respects the idea that islands have solutions, and I think Maximilian talked to that a little bit earlier, and that working together we can actually accelerate action rather than always having things supplied or done to small island developing states. It's the idea of SIDS really leading these conversations, the importance of peer-to-peer support and also technical expertise. In the tourism community of practice, for example, we have technical support from the National Ocean, from NOAA, from US agencies, who are considering developing a small grants program for islands within that, based on what they're saying that their needs are in the community of practice. So, and then the data for climate resilience one, we're working very closely with technical agencies, including NOAA, and also the Pacific Regional Integrated Sciences Assessment, and the one in the Caribbean, CAPRISA and PACRISA, to look at where are the what is being done, how can we supply technical support in a way that meets the needs that are being identified by islands. And I think that's really the critical thing, is that in these communities of practice, it's islanders that are identifying what they'd like to work on together. And in our, just to highlight in our, and I'll finish, but in our data for climate resilience one, the real focus is on the challenge of using data to build resilience, and the fact that there's a lot of data, the landscape of data resources from local, national, regional, international levels is very complex. And you know, what are the opportunities and options for islands to actually try and progress this? It's an issue that's been identified for years. How do we move forward? In our network, we're really focused on the idea of dashboards as a visual organization of data. We actually have licenses. We have an MOU with Esri, and we have licenses for dashboards that we give to our members at no cost, to try and look at how we overcome some of the barriers to integrating some of these things. And so we have a number of islands that are in the process of developing dashboards where data is kind of going to come be an important element, obviously. But the real important part of this is really setting local goals, setting national goals that can be tracked and measured, including on climate. And I think that there's real opportunity for significant progress on this, and we're really we're in the first couple of years of these communities of practice. We see opportunity for getting the right technical assistance to islands in the way that they want it, and also helping islands to strengthen what they're doing, learn from each other, share new ideas, share new approaches in a way. And that's kind of what this platform that we're creating is really doing, as well as connecting to the political leader side of things. And as I said, we're not just working with SIDS, but SIDS are a really fundamental core of this network. And yeah, if you're interested in more information, please let me know. We also have a website which talks about these communities of practice, talks about what our model is, and you can start to see some of the priorities that are emerging, both on tourism and also on data from these initial meetings. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kate. And feel free to share the link to the website in the chat box. I see that the panelists have been sharing links to the work that they're doing, and this is a great way of distributing the lessons and the challenges and the opportunities. This concludes our panel discussion. I want to really thank the panelists for joining us. Lots of great examples out there. And do stay engaged with the organizers as we move forward, and there will be upcoming opportunities and more knowledge sharing activities to be done. With that, I will pass it on to the UNFCCC Secretariat for closing. Over to you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Harry. My name is Alejandro Kilpatrick. I'm the manager of the Capacity Building Subdivision here at the Climate Change Secretariat. And it's been a pleasure to be part of these very interesting discussions and a great panel. Big thanks to the OECD and UNDESA for allowing us to have this opportunity to hear about good practices on capacity development for climate change in SIDS. From the discussions we heard today, it's evident that the capacity building community within SIDS is made up of diverse stakeholders, each playing their own role in enhancing climate-related capacities to deliver effective climate action practices. Finally, I mean, we're short of time, but I want to thank the OECD and UNDESA's SIDS unit for their collaboration today and for their diligent work on capacity development for climate change in the to benefit SIDS. And looking forward to continue engaging with OECD, UNDESA, and other partners. It was very refreshing to see a lot of common faces that we worked before, and looking forward to continue engaging. And please watch out for an outcomes report of this event that will be shared soon through our outreach channels. And in the chat, you'll see links to continue following up the work of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building and its network, and a kind invitation to maybe join this network to increase opportunities for collaboration on matters relating to capacity development. Again, on behalf of the UNFC Secretariat, a big thanks to all of you, and wish you a very nice continuation of your day. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon.